This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Welcome back, everyone. Today is Friday, which means we're going to be looking at some of your work. So I've got some mail here. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first up is this book. It comes to us from Greg Williams. This is called Photo Breakdowns, and Greg's name might sound familiar to you. He's a celebrity photographer. He does a lot of Hollywood work. He's worked for magazines such as Vanity Fair and British Vogue. He also has his own magazine called Hollywood Authentic. Greg has had a pretty long career. He's been working since the 90s, and some of you may remember his name when Leica did the Q2 special edition that was the James Bond tribute. It was the Greg Williams / Daniel Craig Q2, and they worked together quite a bit. Greg is an amazing photographer. I really like the style that he works in. I have not met Greg in person, but we have emailed a few times. He's an outstanding guy, and I really like the style that he does. It's very candid. It's very improvisational in nature, even some of the formal portraits that he does. And what's really cool about this is each one of these images is accompanied by a behind-the-scenes story that gives you a little bit of context of what was happening on the shoot, how he got the shot. What's interesting to me is that his rig is usually very light. It also details the camera that he uses for each one of these shots and what lighting was used. Keeps everything really light, and I think this is reflected in the style that he has in the images that you're seeing in here. What's interesting is if you look at Greg, who is a contemporary fashion photographer or Hollywood photographer in the greater context of history, when it comes to people like Richard Avedon, who came out in the 60s and were very groundbreaking, and Avedon was very prolific in that he was getting models outside the studio for photo shoots, and it has a lot to do with what we see today with these images. Anyway, Photo Breakdowns is a really cool book. You can actually get this on Amazon. And kind of a funny story here. So when I pulled this up earlier to see that it was on Amazon, I had a little tag that said, you know, this is #1 in artist monograph books. And so you click on that link. I didn't know this was on Amazon, but you can actually go down and see a full listing of all the current, it's kind of I guess it's the top 50 or so books that are selling right now. And there's a lot of stuff that is pre-released that I hadn't even seen yet. So like there's an Andy Summers book that's coming out. There's this great Edward Steichen book. Ralph Gibson has a book. There's a Saul Leiter retrospective. Anyway, these are show catalogs for museum shows, but it also has monographs that are coming out too. And I wanted to make a comment on this because, you know, when I started this channel, I used to do a lot of photography book reviews on here. And it's funny because those videos still get viewed today. And a lot of times the way this industry works with publishing is it's expensive to publish books, and art books don't stay in print very long. And I always tell people, if there's something that you see, you probably need to get it while it's out, because what'll happen is these things go out of print, then people put them up used on Amazon or on eBay, and then you're looking at a lot of money. And I'll give you an example. Remember a couple of years ago, I talked about this book called La Strada, which deals with Italian street photography from the post-war era. It's got some amazing work in it from photographers most people have never heard of. It's just brilliant work. And I remember when I got this, I was at we have a store in Dallas called Half Price Books, and they sell used books, but they also sell overstock and things of that nature. And so I remember seeing a whole table of La Strada. I mean, there were probably 20 copies there. Hindsight tells me I should have bought all 20 of them. I bought 2 copies on 2 different trips over there. I bought one, loved the book, went back and bought a second. The second one I gave as a gift to my friend John Free, who you guys probably know. He has a YouTube channel as well. And that book went out of print, and now when you go on Amazon, there's people trying to get $850 for it or whatever. And so my point is that it's a good idea that when you see something, don't pass it up if you can help it, because they get expensive later when they become collectibles. But anyway, just wanted to point that out. I would head over to Amazon and definitely get Greg's book. It is super awesome. This is on HarperCollins. It's pretty easy to get, and I think it was #1 the other day when I looked, and it dropped to #2 today. So let's get it back to #1. I'll put a link in the show description for everything that I'm sharing in this video. But Greg, thanks for sending this book. It is awesome. All right, next up we have this little monograph, which comes to us from Russel Joslin. This is called Alone Forever Sometimes. So this is actually interesting. Russel has sent stuff to me before, but not as a photographer, as a photo editor. And Skeleton Key Press, who have kind of an amazing logo here, is Russel's company. And this is actually his first monograph. And so we're going to feature this today. It's a really interesting book. It deals entirely as a collection of self-portraits that were done over about 20 years. And the press release in here states, using himself as a means of expressing the individual emotional state, Joslin's self-portraits strike chords of truth so deeply conveyed and thus experienced that the personal becomes universal, relating to the human condition with conflict and resolution, coexisting as a man versus nature, man versus man, man versus himself, and achieving peace forever fleeting. however fleeting. So a few things that I really like about this: it is highly dramatic, and Russell certainly has kind of a modern Bela Lugosi vibe going on here, but the printing on here is actually very beautiful also. This book is very well done, so that is very impressive right there. And the other thing that I like is how Russell plays with a lot of camera techniques in here. So there's a lot of stuff with longer exposure times where there's a lot of blur involved, there's double exposures in places. He plays a lot in here with depth of field, and then I also really like the artistic metaphors that are in here too. There's a lot of stuff with symbolism. He certainly plays off of the bald head a lot, which I think is very cool. I will put a link to this in the show description, so make sure you check it out. This is a limited edition, so this is limited to 350 copies, it says in here. So if you are interested in this, I would definitely check it out, and I'm going to list everybody in the show description, as I always do. I have to say, we have a pretty wide variety of stuff in here today, so I've got two more that I want to share with you. I've got this really cool documentary project on a fire, actually, and so we're going to get to that, but real quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today. We're the awesome folks over at Squarespace. Listen, you need a website, and we all know how much work that is to build and maintain, but it doesn't have to be. Squarespace is by far the easiest way to build your online presence. It's also the best way to grow a business that works for you without having to write a single line of code. Do you just need a simple portfolio or a blog to showcase your work? Well, Squarespace is perfect. Featuring a drag-and-drop interface, it's intuitive, it allows you to build galleries quickly and update your site with ease. Are you running a business? Well, Squarespace gives you additional tools for things like appointment scheduling, private member areas, social media tools, and even advanced email marketing. Do you sell products or services? Well, Squarespace has you covered with complete tools to power your store, from merchandising to checkout, so that you can sell, ship, and build your customer base. You can even sell classes or manage appointments through your website. And with Squarespace extensions, you can easily sync with third parties to manage, optimize, and enhance your website. From social media integration to SEO, Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to grow a business that works for you. So head over to Squarespace and sign up for the free trial. Start with one of their award-winning templates and see what you can create and just how good you're going to look. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AOP and I can save you an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Just use offer code AOP on checkout. So give it a try and see if Squarespace is right for you. And I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. All right, so next up is a set of little prints that are really cool, and these come to us from Martin Scarland, who writes in here, "Hi Ted, I'm finally getting around to sending you something. I've been meaning to do this for months. I've decided to send a few of these out to people who have inspired and encouraged me." This is really cool. It's a cloth-bound book, but you open it up and it's got a nicely matted and framed print in here. Looks like a cyanotype. And there's another little set of prints in here with a note that reads, "Rhythm, exploring a routine through photography, searching deeper and deeper, again and again, through the same life events to see what beauty can be found in the mundane rhythm that can become life." It's edition number 4, Martin Scarland. Martin, thank you for sending these. These are really cool. I know this is not a book per se, but it's kind of a cool way to showcase and show work using really small prints. And this is something that anybody can kind of do that's not very expensive, and kind of a cool way to think about your work and actually write something about it and group it together. So Martin, thanks for sharing. This is awesome. Okay, so next up is something that is very unusual and actually very cool. This comes to us from Jantzen, who actually is a firefighter, and this is kind of a documentary book that he put together. He includes a note in here, which I will read to you. He says, "Ted, I've enclosed a book that I put together that was more intended as a photo album. The initial print was a small book that is in my drawer and circulated around my firehouse in New Jersey. Backstory is I was on medical leave after having gallbladder removal when my volunteer department was called out about 2 or 3 a.m. in my neighborhood for a house on fire. I went to the scene with my D750, a 24-70, and a 7200, and a Godox flash to document my brothers at work. My company are the ones with the 5s on their helmets, so this does favor them. Recently, I was looking at the small book that I made and realized that I love the photos that I got that night. That being said, earlier this year, I had the book reprinted for me for the firehouse in this larger format, and I once again fell in love with what I got. I know that some of the photos have motion blur, and eyes may not be tack sharp, quote unquote, and I did struggle to include or omit these, but in the end, I'm happy with the ones that I kept made it in. I feel they just added to the story. There is no name to the book, just something I did as a project. I hope you enjoy it. Best regards, Jason." All right, Jay, this is a really interesting concept, and I don't know if you have many opportunities to do this, but essentially what Jay had, it was an opportunity to kind of step into his work environment without actually being at work and see it through the camera lens. And I think it's really cool, and I think it's an interesting project for a documentary project, even though it was just series of photos that he envisioned it. A couple comments in here. You mentioned about the eyes being tack sharp and stuff like that. Here's the thing, is if you did want to turn this into a documentary book, and kind of when I was looking at it, that was the feel I was getting. I'm an outsider. I have no preconception of what's going on here. I don't know any of the people that are in here, and so I'm seeing it in a very different light, and I think most people are, because we're not in the situation where we know people. That being said, I think the story is always going to trump anything that has to do with sharpness. In fact, I would say some of the greatest photographs in the history of the medium really have a lot of technical imperfections to them. Things are slightly out of focus, they might be back focused, there's motion blur, so never worry about those things. I think the most important thing is to capture the story. That being said, I do have a few small criticisms, and I realize once again that you just put this together as a photo album and not trying to tell a story, but you did refer to telling a story in there a couple times, so this is just my takeaway. So first of all, a lot of your sequencing and the way that I see a lot of these things come out, I think you have an interesting color palette that you're working with. Everything's shot at night, and obviously you have the lights from the fire trucks going on, and you have people that are working. And so it creates a really interesting dynamic with the color palette, but you're zoomed in so much that it feels like it's portraits of people a lot of times that are in this environment, and I don't really get a sense of what's going on. Now, there are a couple frames in here and a couple spreads that I think you did in here that are absolutely dynamite. So this is awesome. Even though it's not head on, it shows action happening. The spread of this car followed by the car on the following page, these are incredible shots. They show a little bit of what's happening here, and I get the sense that, okay, we're dealing with a fire that's being put out that involves automobiles. That starts getting a lot of drama going on, and I kind of wish I could see this as a full spread. And this one's incredible too, where you have the hoses in the snow on the street. I think what I love about this is it is very different than the rest of the stuff in the book. You have a low angle right here. It's black and white. You've got a sense of drama that's going on, and this really speaks. It would be really cool to see a little more incorporation of these elements in. It's not that the portrait-oriented shots are bad. It's just that I don't think that I'm getting much of a story out of this. And again, I know that wasn't your intention, but just telling you of somebody who's stepping in, looking at it from the outside, not knowing anything, these things start to tell me more of a story and give me context, and they're so good, I wanted to point them out. And this is going to be a little bit nitpicky. I think the print quality in here is actually really good, but when you select page weights, these are really heavy pages. Each one of them is like a piece of cardboard. It's really tough to flip through. I know that a lot of the print-on-demand companies offer these, but I think it's worth going with something that's just a little more conventional if you're going to go into a book format. If you're thinking of this as a photo album, there's a series of prints and they're not bound, I don't have a problem with that, but when you're trying to flip through, it becomes a little difficult. I'm telling you, man, money shot. So Jay, I love the concept. I think this is so interesting to see somebody as a firefighter that's a profession that I know very little about, and to be able to kind of come in as an outside observer and see this in a book form. You've got some great shots in here. What I would suggest is kind of see if you can't take this a step further and add to it a little bit and maybe tell more of a story as you're going through. I think this is such a wonderful seed of an idea, and much respect for being a first responder. That is a heroic job that gets very little thanks. And so God bless you, man. And this book is awesome. So thanks for sending. As I mentioned before, I will link up to everybody in the show description that I showed work in this video. Please support your fellow colleagues. And if you have any questions, drop me a comment. Until the next video, I will see you guys then. Later.